Most war stories end with explosions, screaming, and a clear winner. This one doesn't. In December 1944, an American infantry company surrounded a handful of German soldiers hiding in a ruined farm near the German border. The Americans had tanks, mortars, and numbers. The Germans had almost nothing left. And yet, one man refused to surrender. Not because he thought he could win, not because he believed in victory anymore, but because in his mind, surrender had to mean something. Here's the question, and I want you to answer it honestly as you watch. If you knew the war was already lost, would you still refuse to surrender? Would you fight for duty, for pride, for dignity? Or would you choose survival? Don't answer yet. Sit with it. Because by the end of this story, one small decision, made in silence, not battle, forces you to rethink what courage actually looks like. And when it's over, I want you to comment which choice you would have made and why. No right answers, just truth. Let's begin. Okay, so on December 1944. By then, the Western Front wasn't a clean line on any map anymore. It was pressure. Constant, grinding pressure. Villages collapsed under shell fire, roads drowned in mud and ice, forests frozen solid. Men moved forward one hedgerow at a time, exhausted and half-numb. American units pushing through eastern France and toward the German border were no longer meeting organized resistance everywhere. In many places, the war simply faded. White flags hung from windows, rifles were set gently in doorways, hands went up without a word. But not everywhere. Outside a small, half-destroyed town near the Saar region, an American infantry company came to a halt. Ahead of them, a narrow road cut through leafless trees and the charred remains of abandoned wagons. Recon patrols had reported a German rear guard holding a tight cluster of stone farm buildings at the bend in the road. There was no artillery fire, no movement, just silence. And by late 1944, silence rarely meant safety. A squad moved forward carefully. They expected nothing or a quick surrender. Instead, a rifle cracked through the frozen air. The round snapped into the dirt near their boots. Then another, controlled, deliberate. The squad fell back. The company commander sent a runner. The Germans were still there, and someone was clearly in charge. Through binoculars, an American lieutenant caught a glimpse of him. The man stood in the doorway of the largest building, wearing a long coat, his field cap pulled low. A pistol hung at his side, binoculars rested against his chest. He wasn't shouting orders, he wasn't firing wildly, he was watching. Prisoners captured earlier that day had mentioned him in passing. A major, an older officer, a veteran of the Eastern Front, a man who, according to them, had already decided how this would end. A loudspeaker was dragged forward. A German-speaking corporal was ordered to call out. The message was simple, straight from the handbook. You are surrounded. Lay down your arms. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. After a pause, the response came. A single rifle shot fired harmlessly into the air. Then silence again. The Americans waited, called again, louder this time, more explicit. The reply came back in German. Calm, almost polite. The major refused. He stated that he was an officer of the German army. His orders were to delay the enemy. He would not surrender his position. No insults, no threats, just a statement of fact. The lieutenant lowered his binoculars and looked around at the men beside him. They were soaked, cold, hollow-eyed. Some hadn't slept properly in nearly 3 days. No one wanted a firefight over a farm that meant nothing anymore. But the road did. Higher command was notified. The answer came quickly. Do not bypass. Do not leave a hostile force in your rear. Resolve it. Preparations began. Mortars were brought up, though no one fired yet. The company commander hesitated. By late 1944, many officers had learned that force wasn't always the first or best solution. Another attempt was made. A white cloth was tied to a stick. An NCO, unarmed, stepped onto the road. Hands visible, slow and careful, he walked halfway forward and stopped at a safe distance. He called out again. This time, the German major stepped fully into view. He didn't raise his weapon. He listened. The NCO repeated the surrender terms. He spoke of medical care, of food, of warmth, of surviving the night. The major answered slowly. He admitted his men were exhausted. He said he had no illusions about victory, but surrender for him wasn't just a tactical choice, it was personal. He had already retreated too far, given up too much ground. He would not retreat again. The NCO asked how many men he had. The major didn't answer. Instead, he asked a question of his own. "How much time will you give us?" The NCO returned. The exchange was relayed. The company commander thought for a moment, then made a decision that surprised several of his men. 1 hour. 1 hour to reconsider. 1 hour before the Americans advanced. The order passed quietly down the line. Rifles rested against shoulders. Mortar crews waited. Time dragged. At the 40-minute mark, something changed. A young German soldier stepped out from one of the side buildings. His hands were raised. He walked toward the American positions, trembling. Whether from cold or fear, no one could tell. The young soldier said the major had dismissed him, told him that if he wished to surrender, he was free to do so, that no one would stop him. Within minutes, 2 more followed, then another. None of them were shot. The Americans waved them forward, searched them quickly, and wrapped them in spare blankets. At the end of the hour, when the deadline expired, the major still stood in the doorway of the main building, alone, unmoving. Then the assault began. It was short, controlled, overwhelming. Machine gun fire pinned the windows while mortars landed behind the farm buildings, sealing off escape routes instead of leveling the structures. Infantry moved in short, practiced rushes, using stone walls and shallow ditches for cover. The Germans fired back, but the shots were weak and irregular. They were low on ammunition. Their resistance was no longer tactical, it was symbolic. 15 minutes later, it was over. Smoke drifted through the yard. A wounded German soldier lay on the ground, alive and calling for help. An American medic ran to him immediately, without waiting for orders. Inside the main building, they found the major. He was seated at a wooden table. His pistol lay beside him, unloaded. His gloves had been removed carefully and placed next to it. When the Americans entered, he stood. He didn't raise his hands until he was asked. The American lieutenant, uniform streaked with mud and chest heaving from the advance, studied him for a long moment. Then, through an interpreter, he asked a simple question. "Why didn't you surrender when you had the chance?" The major answered without hesitation. He said surrender, in his view, should be earned, not requested, that an officer's duty was to resist until resistance no longer had meaning. He wanted his men to see that he did not abandon his post lightly. The lieutenant nodded. He had heard explanations like this before. Some made sense, others didn't. The major was searched and escorted outside. What happened next surprised almost everyone. He wasn't shoved, he wasn't stripped of his insignia. No one shouted at him. Instead, an American offered him a cigarette. The major declined at first, then accepted. One enlisted man noticed the major's boots were soaked through. Quietly, almost awkwardly, he pointed toward a fire barrel where prisoners were being allowed to warm themselves under guard. The major hesitated, then walked over. Later, during processing, the Americans learned more about him. He had served in uniform since before the war. He had lost a son on the Eastern Front. Whatever illusions he once had were long gone. That night, he ate the same rations as the American soldiers guarding him. When an intelligence officer later asked if he regretted refusing to surrender earlier, the major paused. Then he said he regretted the delay, but not the decision. The Americans, he said, had proven something to him, not through force, but through restraint. In the weeks that followed, the incident barely appeared in official reports. A brief resistance, several prisoners taken, no American casualties. In the scale of the war, it meant almost nothing, but for the men who were there, it stayed with them. They remembered the officer who chose resistance even when it could no longer change the outcome. They remembered the choice to wait instead of destroy, to offer time instead of immediate violence. And they remembered that surrender, like refusal, was not always about ideology or loyalty. Sometimes it was about dignity. Sometimes it was about how a war ends, not in victory or defeat, but in how two enemies choose to behave when the fighting no longer needs to continue. If stories like this matter to you, support the video so these moments reach more people. They're easy to miss in the larger narrative, but they deserve to be remembered. This battle didn't end with a victory parade. It ended with silence and a choice. One man refused to surrender when it no longer mattered. Another side chose restraint when destruction would have been easier. And that's what makes this story uncomfortable, because it leaves us with a question that has no safe answer. Who showed more courage here? The man who resisted or the ones who waited? Think about it before you comment. Would you have given that extra hour, or would you have ended it immediately? Would you respect the German major's decision, or do you think he cost his men unnecessary suffering? Tell me in the comments, was the major right or wrong? And if you were the commander that day, what would you have done? I read every comment, and the most thoughtful ones always shape the next story. If this story made you pause, even for a second, support the channel so more moments like this aren't forgotten. Because history isn't just about who won, it's about how people behaved when winning no longer mattered. Now go comment. I'm genuinely curious what you think.